Hello, I'm Joe Pearson, and I am pastor of the Shiloh Church, part of the Praise family of churches, which includes McMinnville, Monmouth, Porta de Fe in Monmouth, Harriet House. We also have Mitchell, the bicycle hostel, which I want to talk to you about today. Pat and Julie have been working there for 8 years now. 4,300 guests have stayed in the hostel. So many of you have contributed and worked. I know that the bunk beds were built by the crew at Shiloh, and the septic system was done by McMinnville, and the quilts have been put together by McMinnville, and Monmouth people have worked and sacrificed. I know there's been a lot of work involved. Well, we're at another place, and we want to address a need in Mitchell. Pat and Julie have a need for housing. I mean, comfortable housing. So I've got this dream, and I think we could pull it off. We have decided to sell the old parsonage, which is kind of run down, and we needed it to go away because there's a lot of work to be done. And we'd like to buy a new lot, and we already got one picked out, and we would like to prepare it and get it framed up, and then start bringing in teams of volunteers. One week we could do windows and roofing. 1 week we can do sheetrock and insulation. 1 week could be electrical week. 1 week could be plumbing week. We're going to set these weeks all out in advance so that you can sign up for when you could come. So if you can give us a day or 2 days or a full week or whatever you could give us, that would be terrific. It'll be fun to do it together as a bunch of churches, and also it'll provide a need for Pat and Julie, comfortable housing for the next stint of their career, because 10 years down the road, they're going to be getting closer. Well, they're going to be my age. And so that will be important for them to have a house of their own that they can, depend on, and maybe have a little equity traveling into their golden years. Anyway, can you help? That would be wonderful. If you can help financially, that would be great. But if you can help with your own talent and work, that would be awesome. You'll be in touch. We'll be in touch, and we'll let you know what ways you can contribute. Thank you.
To hear half of you guys cheering when he announces I'm going to be speaking. I don't really drink coffee that often, but I decided today, this is the first time I've ever spoken as an old, retired, wise old man. And I gotta tell you, it is a great feeling to see these young kids coming up behind us. Joe, I feel like I could just pinch your cheeks. See, I don't know how to mess this. These new things. I'm gonna drink my coffee and be retired. Pause. Do you guys realize how much shorter the sermon just got? I don't have to think about that the whole time. Man, I leave and come back, and it's the weirdest feeling. I feel like I owe everybody here an apology, and I want to clarify why. And it is true, and I mean it. Not that long ago, maybe 2 years, I started to come to terms with the fact that I could feel the plane landing. If you guys have ever flown anywhere, you go through a series. Landing a plane is a series of steps, and the first thing that you hear is they kind of power down the engine a little bit, and you look down and you're still way off the ground, but you know something's changed. This is not what it was before. And so you feel it powering down, and the problem that I started to experience is I don't know what's next, right? I don't know what's next, but Over the course of the last 15 years, I feel like I got very, very disconnected from who I knew that I was and who this job will turn you into. Let me explain. There's an authenticity when you're in a position of leadership that you cannot have. But everybody wants one thing from their leader, and what is it? Authenticity. Leadership includes dealing with savages who want to see you do well and be ripped to shreds at the same time. And so about 2 years ago, I started to realize the plane was landing and my time here was going to be done, and I didn't know what to do about that. But I didn't want to mislead anybody. I don't want to lie to anybody because, honestly, I didn't know what the plan was. I didn't even know what it looked like. To be honest, I didn't know what it would look like to ever leave. I didn't have a plan on what that could look like. And so I feel like almost I owe you an apology. I owe you a reintroduction. I want you to know who I truly am as best I can. I'm a very social person. And we're rediscovering this in the last couple months. I love having people in my house. Raise your hand if you've ever been in my house. See, exactly. I like being in people's houses. I like having dinner with people. I like having friends at an equal level. I like having people who feel like that they're free to speak freely into my life. And this position, knowing that you're going to leave, doesn't allow that. And so here's my apology. I want you to know I'm genuinely sorry if you ever felt from me like I was keeping you at arm's length. And if I had to go back and do it over again, I would have had to have done it the same way. What I don't want to do is lead you guys to believe everything's fine, and then all of a sudden I'm gone, and it feels like a bait and switch. I hope at very least you guys felt like I was honest about what was happening as best I could, as best as I knew, that I was honest about where we were. I want to read Colossians 2. There's a whole sermon in these 3 verses, but only if I preach it real fast. Colossians 2, verse 6, it says, "So then, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him." I got to get through this before I get all opinionated. "Rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness." Does that seem super inspiring? Does that seem pretty basic? It's pretty basic. That's pretty much the same Christianity we've heard since childhood. "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ." From now till we're done, it's going to be a series of difficult questions. That's it. I feel like I've got somewhat of an answer, but the answer won't make sense unless the questions are clear. And so if it feels like, man, I'm afraid Jordan's gone down a deep, dark hole of weirdness, well, now you get to go with me. The context of Colossians 2, it's important because it's written to believers who are battling against Greek philosophers, and history tells us that Greek philosophers were some of the smartest, most well-educated, highly intellectual, well-spoken. Have you ever noticed that sometimes somebody can present an argument that you know is wrong, but they present it so well that by the time they're done, you're like, dang, maybe I'm wrong. That's what the believers are up against, and here's Paul, and he is contending for the faith. He is saying, listen, I know that what they're saying sounds good, but don't get lost in hollow and deceptive philosophy. And here's the problem with hollow and deceptive philosophy. It's exactly like Joe was saying a minute ago. Sometimes it tastes like honey on your lips, and you're like, wait a minute, I want more of that. Because to be an effective philosophy, all it's got to do is make you feel better about you. That's it. If I can make you feel better about you, you leave, this is what I promise you. This is what I know about people. And you won't want to admit it about yourself, but I know it's true. If I say, hey, you did a terrible job on something, instantly you make me the problem. Doesn't matter how bad your job was, I'm the problem for saying it. Conversely, if I go, man, you do such a good job. This is just amazing. I'm so proud of what you've done here. You're going to be like, man, that Jordan's a good guy. Why? Has nothing to do with me. It's how I made you feel about yourself. Do you see this? If I can stand up here and make you feel good about you, you'll leave and like me. I know you don't want to believe this, because I don't want to believe this, even though I know it's true. I can buy your approval. Do you know why I struggled to feel like I lived in community when I was here? It's because I wasn't willing to pay the price of buying my way in. Stick with me. It gets worse. There's a movie I used to watch when I was a little kid. It's called Hook. Had Robin Williams. Anybody remember this? And he falls in love. Robin Williams falls in love, and he moves away with Wendy. And over the course of time, what happened to him happens to all of us. I say this as an old, retired, wise man now. But he comes back, and he's old, and he sees the lost boy. Has anybody seen this movie? And he says, I'm Peter Pan. And they go, no, you're not. Look at you. Ugh. Kind of that look you give yourself when you look in the mirror. What happened? How did this happen? There's a scene where this little boy who walks up, I love it so much because it's so insightful. It's entertaining to a kid. A kid can watch this movie and be like, oh, that's a good movie. But we as adults, we see this and we see it from a different perspective. There's a little boy and he's just staring at Robin Williams in the face. And on the other side of the conversation, Robin Williams is staring back at him. Does anybody remember this scene? They're just staring at each other. And all of a sudden, the little boy, he kind of perks up a little bit, and he reaches out his hand and he touches him on the face. Anybody remember what he said? There you are. You're still there. What happened? And I think if you're taking notes, first point is a disconnected soul. Think back to who you were when you were a little kid. And I think I've really struggled against the idea of go back to who you were as a little kid, because me as a little kid was so stupid. I told my mom one time I could swim across the ocean. You just sink to the bottom and rocket your way up like you're in a swimming pool. And she's like, well, you're insured, so. I'm not talking about the opinions that you had. I'm thinking like more along the lines of identity. Think back to who you've always been. And I think I would be so interested to know if you could meet that happy little kid, because listen, kids were born happy. If you ever see a kid that's not happy, something's happened. Something's wrong. Something has broken him. Something has begun the disconnection process early. But if you go back to a little kid, they're happy. And if you were to sit down and you were to try to explain your life to that little kid, I think it would be like Robin Williams and the Lost Boy going, what happened? How did you get so far disconnected? We had such a good plan. Maybe we would say things like, well, I had some scars, and the kid would go, I don't care about that. Anxiety, finances, relationships, all these things that you grow into knowing that you didn't know as a kid before you're pulled away from your own self. Now, here's the trippy part. Stick with me. If who you were born to be, even all the way back into your childhood, and who you've become today has become disconnected. They've separated. If you would wake up and say, I go through the patterns and the habits, the easiest thing to do would be ignore it. Listen, I know. If you're like, I don't want to hear this, I don't want to know. I get it. Because the problem is once you know it, it's hard to unknow. Isn't it? You're going to get up and you're going to go to work tomorrow and you're going to go, how would I explain this to 8 or 9-year-old me? My patterns, my habits, my broken relationships, the way I look at finances. How did I get here? And once you stop and really address that, the problem is this. Everybody wakes up and puts on the white hat. They always think that they're justified in everything that they do or see or everything that they believe. It's all fully justified because we know that if you were in my position, you'd be doing the same thing until you talk to yourself. And the problem is you start talking to yourself, it gets really weird, doesn't it? Because you call yourself on all the BS. Sunday school, when we were kids, and we were very proper religious kids, we said that stood for Bible study. So here's the question. If you've disconnected from who you were truly intended to be in this world, from the impact you were truly supposed to make in this world, if you've become disconnected, here's my question. Where did the first one go? And think about this. Because I don't know the answer. I'm asking, I don't know the answer to this. Where did the first one go? Did he die? Did she die? Is she gone? Is she separate? Is he hiding? If you said you disconnected from the original intent and the original identity, the question becomes, where did that identity go? Is that person waiting for you to find them? I love the silence in this room because this is exactly how I hear it. And I go, I don't know. What would it say to you now? Mark 8:36 says this. And I've always read this wrong. I've always, my whole life, read this wrong. You know why? Because I was taught wrong by people who understood wrong, who were disconnected from their souls, and they were trying to leverage religion to make themselves feel good about who they'd become. Not that I'm jaded. What does it profit a man, you can finish this verse, to gain the whole world and sacrifice his? I thought that meant when you die. The Bible's saying, what benefit is it to reach all the successes this world has to offer if you stay disconnected from who you were created to be? I used to think the enemy wanted me broke and sad, and I don't think that anymore. I think the enemy would love if I was wealthy and happy as long as I was never reconnected to my original purpose. I could be a successful pastor. I could be a celebrated spiritual leader, and all the things the world was trying to do to me before I threw a fit. But it doesn't rectify that moment where I look myself in the eye and I go, I know this isn't right. I think that means there's a hell available before you die, and it's here on earth, and it's when you're the most lost from who you were originally intended to be. I'm obsessed with this idea. Point 2 is non-player characters. Jet tells me the other day, I'm so frustrated by my kids because they're not as disconnected as I am. Healthy little brats. I'm raising kids that need less therapy than I need. Yay. Jet said this. He said, I used to think of people who lived in communities with lots of houses almost like NPCs. And I said, explain what that means. And he said, in video games, they have what's called non-player characters, and they're present in the game. They're designed to be, add to the overall feel of the video game, but they're not real. They don't actually participate. There's only about 3 players on the screen, but if you only saw 3 players on the screen, it would all seem sort of meaningless. So they add what's called a non-player character. And this non-player character, let me give you an example. Think about this. 2.8 million people. What's the population of Oregon? I think Oregon's like 3.7. Is that right? Something like that? Somewhere in there? 4 maybe? 2.8 million people die in the U.S. every year. I noticed none of you broke down crying at that stat. Because we don't want to admit this, but we are aware of the fact that 2.8 million people die every year, and if we're being honest, we actually don't really care. I mean, we kind of care because, right? We're supposed to. But when you go home, how much is that number going to bother you? It's not going to bother you, and here's why. Because we boil millions of people down into one stat. We take something very complicated and very complex and very spread out and very hard to decipher, and we put it in one container, and once we've got it in one container, we can put it on the shelf, and it fits. That means if 2.8 million people die every year in this country, not even the world, in this country, 2.8 million people die every year, you don't care. That means when you die, most of the world won't care. Most of the world is not going to shed a tear over you when you're gone. And yet we carry this burden as though, what if the world were to discover who we really are, or the process that we're going through, when in reality, they don't care. It leaves you feeling like we are non-player characters. There's a world that's going on, but really we're stuck in the periphery. We're stuck in the sidelines. We're not actually a part of this game. It feels us leaving present but absent. Anybody ever felt this way? You're present, but you're absent. You're there, but you're not there. You're here, but you're not really involved. Unattached from contributing. Has anybody ever felt like I could give, but what difference does it make? Here's my favorite one. You want to get under my skin from zero to instantly under my skin. When somebody goes, well, I give, so I demand to know everything about what I'm giving to. Well, did you give it, or did you attach yourself to it and try to wiggle your way into non-player character status? Your inability to feel attached to contribution. You feel unattached, and the only way you can feel attached to your contribution is if somebody takes you out of the bleachers and makes you feel special about it. Going through the paces. Hard question. Douglas Murray asked this in a podcast I heard. He said, we do all these exercises and all this work and all these healthy patterns and healthy habits so we can extend our life. He goes, if you're going to waste it sitting on the couch watching Netflix, what's the point of another 10 years? Science, this is what I love. Science can't explain how we do this. It's 2022. We should have answers for these kinds of questions. They don't know how people are able to take something super complex, a glass of water, a cup of coffee. If I were to hold up this cup of coffee, you guys all just saw it as one thing. You didn't think about the process that went into making the paper. You didn't think about the process, the plastics that went into making the lid. You didn't think about the ingredients, the billions of molecules that make up what I'm holding. It all gets simplified down into one thing. Everybody with me so far? Science doesn't know how we do that, but they do know this. The only way that we're able to do it is if we understand its functioning purpose. I see some light bulbs coming on. You're like, oh my gosh, this is going to become a sermon. Oh yeah. The only way that we can understand things is one thing. The only way that we can simplify it in a way that we can understand is if we can understand its purpose. We say it's a glass of water. Why? Because we understand its purpose. We understand it's there for our benefit. We understand that it's a good thing. It's better to have a glass of water than to not have a glass of water. We know that it's useful. We know what it'll do for our body. Because we understand its purpose, we can instantly shove it down into something and call it good. The problem is this, that if you can do that with millions of people, you can begin to do it to yourself. You can write yourself off as unimportant because you don't understand your own process. And you'll never understand your own process if you don't understand your own identity. If you guys need to go back and watch the recording, in fairness to you, I've had 2 months to write one sermon. It includes understanding the purpose, that we can take complicated and we can oversimplify it, and we do that so that we can survive. We can call NPCs. I've been going to the Arizona Cardinals games, and here's what's so fascinating to me. They're not really good this year. And so the stands aren't necessarily full, but there are still tens of thousands of people, and they're all, for the purpose of that game, NPCs, non-player characters. They're not important. They're not getting introduced on the screen. And so the Arizona Cardinals go to great lengths to try to make people feel like that they're important. They'll show their face on the screen. Kiss your girlfriend. Oh, okay. You go home, hey, I got in the game. How was it? It was amazing. For 15 seconds, I was in the game. Now stop and think about that. Do you think anybody saw someone on the screen like, oh my gosh, an important person? No. You think the guy running the switchboard was like, that person seems strangely unique? We tell ourselves what we want to hear, that for a second, we mattered in the world. We were important in the world. And then it's gone, and we're like, in a movie set, don't ask me how I know this. In a movie set, next time you watch any show, any TV show, anything you want to watch, if a character doesn't speak, they're not an actor, they're a paid prop. It's true. They only have to pay you $100 if you're a prop. They have to pay you over $1,000 if you're speaking, because if you're speaking, then you're acting, you're representing something. But like the people who walk in and they're like, prop, paid prop. And I think sometimes we get to be paid props. We get to be present, but we're absent. We don't get to be meaningful. We don't get to be heard. We don't get to feel understood. We're in the room, but we're not really. If we were to say something, it feels like the world would be like. You ever felt this way at church? We need you to attend. We need you to be here because if we get enough NPCs, then someone's going to think we're important. And, well, we need you to give. We need you to keep giving. That's important. And I'm not talking about Shiloh. I'm talking about any group. Any group is capable. Communism calls them useful idiots. Isn't that interesting? There's even political ties. We can basically, point number 3 is an NPC identity as we start to do it to ourselves. If I'm being honest, I feel like an NPC in my own life a lot because I have this idea of where I want to go in life and I have this inability to make it happen on my own. And there have been times where I've tried really, really hard to steer. You guys, I hope you guys remember these years where I was super, super, super invested in every single detail and every single minute thing of this church because I was determined and I'm going to be whatever. And then I've had times where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. I don't know where I'm going, and I just coast. And you know what's really terrifying? The results were kind of the same. I could burn myself out. I could ruin my family. Or I could relax and become detached. And the caravan just kind of kept going. And it can leave you feeling like, wait a minute. I'm one of the guys in the stands who thought I was meaningful and I thought I was important, and yet when I'm gone, everything still continues to work. Was I ever important? Maybe I'm not even real. Anybody heard this thought? You can get way into it. We won't. For the sake of time, we won't get into it. But have you ever thought, like, what if this is a video game and I'm just like this designed bystander, and the only reason that I participate is so that I can keep my own mind engaged? I'm just keeping myself busy. I'm not really making an impact in the world. I don't really matter to the world. I'm going to be one of those 2.85 million people someday, and the world's not going to care, but I think that I'm important, so it keeps me busy. But really, all I'm doing is just treading water till I die. Anybody else? Is that where we? There's nothing worse than somebody who's in an NPC position and doesn't realize it. There's a man who sits in section, you want to be careful saying sits in section, 416 at the Cardinals games, and this man will stand up. For you guys that haven't been to Cardinal Stadium, 416 is not right next to the field. He will stand up in a crowd, a section, probably this close to this many people in section. He'll stand up by himself wearing the Cardinals jersey, wearing the Cardinals hat, and he will start giving like oddly detailed instructions to the refs. Instead of just standing up like, that's a bad call, boo. When they go around the outside like that, you have to start watching, blah, blah. And he'd stand up screaming, and literally, no one can hear him. Who are you talking to? Do you think that the ref is going to, hold on. There's nothing worse, because the problem is you see yourself in that guy, don't you? Where you're like, what if I'm not in a position of contribution in this world, but I'm pretending that I am so that I can feel important? I want so badly to be engaged in something. I want to be meaningful. Philosophy teaches us that we are meant to be known and loved. If you are only loved but not known, you are me for the last 10 years. It's not an insult. I didn't want people to get to know me. It's too much of a liability. When you're in a position of leadership, you don't want to be too transparent, but there is nothing good feeling about being loved without being known, because you're being loved as something else. You're being loved as Peter Pan when you know yourself as the lost boy. With me? When people come in and go, oh, I just love that you are, and they fill in the blanks and it's all wrong. There is nothing less loved than you that you'll ever feel in your life. Oh, I just love how you're this way, and you're like, ugh. Or what about this one? Known but not loved. That's worse. It's a lot worse, because people are, no, we got it. Yeah, you don't have to explain, like, we got it. We know you're actually just kind of a miserable, rotten person. It's fine, we know. Sometimes people know you better than you know yourself, and that's why they don't love you. But the combination of known and loved? Colossians 2, let's go back. Colossians 2 says this: see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and elemental spiritual forces. Don't be tricked by tradition and elemental spiritual forces. Here's the problem. You can get all the way to the bottom of all the philosophy. You can search for meaning until you've exhausted every day you have left on this earth. And the best that philosophy can offer is this: you can feel important. You can feel important. Basically what philosophy does is it finds that guy in section 416 and goes, you're right. They should have made that call. It doesn't get him on the field, but it makes him feel good. That's the pursuit of deceptive and hollow philosophy, is to find meaning that lets you live with the life that you've got. It's actually probably closer to what Marx said about religion, which is it's the salve of the suffering. You know, like everybody's going to go through suffering, and religion makes you feel a little bit better. I think that's probably true of deceptive philosophy that says, here's how we can make you feel better without having anything change. I've also heard that stick with me, don't panic. I don't believe this, but I've also heard that religion is basically the elementary practices of those who are not smart enough to understand actual philosophy. I don't want to feel better. Here's the thing. I don't want to feel better. There's a million things that will make you feel better. I know that you're not supposed to say this as a pastor, but guess what? I'm not. There are channels of sin that will make you feel better for a little while. I mean, sure, they separate you from your truest self a little, gradually at first. You can find someone who celebrates your persona in a way that makes you feel good for a little while. You can find chemicals that are introduced into your system that make you feel a little better for a little while, but given enough time, the problem is you just fall further and further and further away from the original problem that you began with. I don't want to feel better. I want to know that I matter. And I know that we're not supposed to admit this. Nobody is supposed to go like, I just really want to be important. But everybody wants it. It's kind of like the trick that like everybody wants the same thing, but nobody admits it. It's kind of like there's that one last donut in the room, and everybody's like, no, I'm good. No, I'm good. I'm fine. I don't even want it. We're like, if everybody leaves. It's like, we want to be meaningful. Of course we want to be meaningful, but nobody wants to admit it. Because if we admit that we want to be meaningful, we have to also admit what? We don't feel meaningful today. Nobody wants to admit that they feel meaningless. Do you know the number one cause of death in males 35 to 48, I think is the number. Don't quote me on the number exactly. You know what the number one cause? Deaths of despair. See, if you think that you're just in the sidelines and you don't matter anyway and your choices don't matter, you can be lost into full nihilism. Nothing matters anyway. If it doesn't matter when I try and it doesn't matter when I don't try, then what's the point of any of it? There's nothing more hopeless feeling than believing that you are a non-player character, that you don't really matter, that really what the masses need is just your participation, that you look up one day and you discover I'm actually just a useful idiot because I've gone so far away from the person that I was created to be that I've lost my sense of impact. I've lost my sense of importance. I've lost it so much that now I really am just a walking zombie. I get up, I go to work, I go through the patterns. I have these little systems of habits I do that help treat and get me through the day. Have you ever laid down at the end of the day and thought, why am I just doing this same thing over and over and over and over again? Please tell me, maybe just men, I don't know, maybe women, I don't know. I can't speak for women. I'm not one yet. You guys have been too quiet for too long. But men, I know that I go through this. Do you ever feel like you lay down at night and you're like, how would I ever explain this to myself? My fear is not that I never meet my 10-year-old self. My fear is that I do. And I have to explain to him this crap pile that my life has become that I can't seem to figure out. Am I alone? Am I alone in that? Could you do me a favor? It would just make me feel good. It may make somebody else feel good. If you're sitting in the room and you would say, my biggest fear would be that I have to explain what my life has become to my child self because I can't even make sense of it in my own head and I'm just treating it and going through a series of habits. If there's anybody else that's going through that in their life, would you mind just raising your hand? Now stop. Keep it up. If it's up, keep it up. Keep it up. Here's what I know. You can put it down. The ones who mean it the most didn't just raise their hand. Because sometimes you feel something too much and you can't look at it yet. If you raised your hand, it's at least like you've maybe taken a step that direction. At least like you're willing to move towards healing. Maybe there's some good that's already started. You're like, I see where I'm at, but maybe I'm going to get better. But the people who are hearing this for the first time, they're like, How was church? Fine, I need a beer. I don't want to talk about it. It's just too much. It gets worse before it gets better. Here comes the coldest part of the morning right before the sun comes up. Ready? If most of the world won't mourn when you die, how do you possibly tell yourself what's right or what's wrong? If the world isn't going to care when you're dead anyway, how could you possibly discuss what's right or what's wrong? How could we joke ourselves into thinking that we're actually valuable at all other than that the closest sense of people around us? You know, they say maybe you get a lot of people at your funeral, but in your life you only get a couple pallbearers. Like at best, you get good pallbearers. What do you tell yourself to sleep at night knowing that in the course of the globe, you are probably going to die overall uncelebrated? Told you it got worse before it got better. And if you can't determine that question, then why does it matter what you do anyway? See, that's what it leads to. If nothing matters, then nothing matters. And if nothing matters, why does it matter that I'm trying? If nothing matters, what is my effort worth? Why is the suffering worth it? See, we can endure suffering if we know where we're going, but if we don't know where we're going, the suffering feels fatal. Jet was riding around a Razor with his little buddy, and he said his little buddy was going 60 miles an hour. And I go, listen, I love you, but I'm going to tell you something really harsh. I said, at 13, you were so painfully dumb that because nothing bad has ever happened to you, stick with me, listen to what I'm going to say. Because nothing bad has ever happened to you, you start to think nothing bad could ever happen. Do you hear what I'm saying? Because you don't feel important and it doesn't feel like that what you do matters. You've never felt the sting of completely surrendering and giving up. You don't understand the value of your contribution to the world. Okay, the sun's coming up. Ready? Everybody in here can finish this sentence. Church person, not church person, you can finish this sentence. The Bible says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, where? As it is. Stick with me. This is the revelation that I'm leaning into right now in my own life. That hell is when you've become so far disconnected from your soul that you don't recognize yourself anymore. And there's this fear, if I ever had to look at myself in the face, I'm going to be ashamed of who I've become. That's the beginning, the development. That's the seeping out of hell. And then I'm all of a sudden, I'm harder on people around me. I don't want to see people happy and doing well because it's a reminder of who I am. I become more and more and more and more miserable. I become somebody who doesn't want to see somebody else succeed. When someone else succeeds, it makes me feel bad and I feel competitive and I begin to live in my own created version of hell pre-death. Jesus said, on earth, as it will eventually be forever in heaven. Verse 8, Colossians 2. He is going against deep, flawed philosophy of the Greeks. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ. Why is that important? Because without the gospel, even the most well-delivered philosophical dissertations from the wisest people leave you knowing that you actually can't possibly matter. How many of you guys were just wrecked, couldn't get out of bed, sad and weeping when Queen Elizabeth died? I mean, if there's a couple of you, I'm sorry. Most of us were like, oh, weird. Is that somebody else? Anybody else was like, oh, that's weird. She was one of the people that got it right. She was one of the people the whole world knew when she died. And at best, we went, So even when it goes well, it's not very good. So the gospel says that no matter what sort of philosophy we follow, no matter how in the game we feel, no matter how on the field we feel, the problem is when we're taken out of the ocean goes back to being okay without us. It doesn't leave an us-shaped hole in it, does it? That's what really bothers us, is that we cannot create permanent and long-lasting, meaningful impact in the world after we die. That's why they built the pyramids, we think. That's why we build these great big structures. They asked Trump, why did you want to become president? If your life is so much worse after becoming president, why did you want to become president? He said, I know a lot of people that are very wealthy and nobody knows who they are. That's kind of a gross answer. I know there's a lot of us in here that are very politically charged. Knock it off. That's not the right answer. Because I thought more fame would create more meaningful. Matthew 6, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is, as it will be, as it's always been in heaven. Psalms 51, 10, 19 says this. It's just 10. Psalms 51, verse 10. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Wait. It didn't say clean up the heart that I'm working with. Everybody in here is here for a reason, and that reason basically boils down to something good was going to happen here that was better than what was going to happen at home. You came here hoping for something, and maybe this is it. David didn't say, clean up the heart I've got. He said, the heart I've got is flawed and broken, and it wants all the wrong things. You ever been there? The heart that I've got, I've messed it up too much. This car's never going to run again. I need a new one. Create in me a new heart, not clean up the heart you gave me. You almost sense David's desperation of, I've gotten so disconnected, I've gotten so lost, I've become something I never intended to be. I need a new heart and renew a right spirit in me. Connect me back to, create a new heart, renew my spirit. Create in me a new heart that wants the things that I want, that I'm supposed to have, and bring me back to who you created me to be so I can be a person of impact. Now, only the gospel says that you've been given a value. I love this. I love this so much. Based on your purchase price, not on supply. See, generally we dictate the value of something based on its rareness. Yes? If something is rare, that gives it value. And if it's common, it decreases in value. The problem is you're always going to be kind of common. If I know you for 2 weeks, I'll know somebody that's kind of like you. We're not as unique as we want to be, and we think that our value comes from being unique, and so we don't want to be known because we want to be unique and special. I'm not like other girls. You know the one thing rodeo queens all say? If you're a rodeo queen, I'm sorry. I need you to know this. You know one of the things that rodeo queens say? I'm not like other rodeo queens. I'm not like most pastors. I'm not like most moms. I'm not like most. I'm cool. What are we trying to do? We're trying to make ourselves unique, because if we can be unique, we can be more valuable. But the problem is, in that line of thinking, there's too many of you. There's just too many of you. You're the guy in 416 yelling at the refs, and it's like, dude, come on. But the gospel says it has to be settled in Christ, because Christ said he traded himself for you. That's a universal value. To a universal God that sees you as unique and special. The Bible says he knows your fingerprints. He knows the numbers of hairs on your head. He loves you in a way that a lover loves a spouse. He loves you in a way that a parent loves a child. He loves you in a way that a creator loves its creation. And we struggle through this separation of our souls because that wasn't enough, and we looked for something more valuable and we got stuck. We got stuck in addiction and sin habits and patterns. I'm done with this. I know I've gone too long, but I'm done with this. I want you to think about this. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that you and I and we as people, we get stuck in our patterns, and we become so disconnected, and we long for that moment where, like, our child self touches us on the face and goes, oh, there you are. I think it's good that we got stuck, because when we come back, we'll never again decrease the value of who Jesus is and what he's offering. We've been on the other side. We know what was offered out there. And what we found was it was just a never-ending spiral, a bottomless pit of despair and self-focus and what about this one? Self-seriousness. Nobody laughs at themselves when they've lost their soul. You come back and you go, wait a minute, I'm loved. Oh, wait, I'm known. I'm known and I'm loved by the Creator. And let's go back to the beginning, because he's who created you in the beginning. He's the one that put that child on this earth because there's a purpose and a plan and a goal for that child to grow and to develop and mature, to make an impact in the world, to get on the field and get out of the bleachers. That's why Paul says, don't get tricked by the Greek philosophy. Don't let yourself get distracted. Go back to Christ. Find your purpose. Find your value. Find your meaning in him. Go back to the soul. Reconnect your soul. Ask for a new heart. Because then all the celebration in the world won't change you either. In the same way that being anonymous has destroyed us to this point, fame won't destroy you at that point. You get to be rooted in the thing that is life-giving and purpose-giving and meaningful and drives the very meaning and the essence of who God created you to be. You get to be fully alive in that. And people don't have any power over that either direction. Lord, this is probably not something we can fully grasp in what seems like I've preached for an hour. But God, I think that's probably true of a lot of people, that if they were to have to go back and give account of who they've become in the world, it's very different than what they'd hoped or expected. And when we feel exposed like that, we don't want to be known. We don't want to be in community. We isolate ourselves, or worse yet, we surround ourselves with the wrong people who will validate the brokenness, or people who are broken in the same way, because if they're broken in the same way, then at least we feel safe. God, bring us back to a community of people who drive us back to our best self. God, that's what happens in churches. When it's done well, we come collectively together in one room and we say, no, there's better than what we've got. We begin to move back towards health. We begin to move back towards purpose. I pray that for everybody here. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm to the fiercest trial and storm. What heights of love and what depths of peace, when fears are stilled and when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone, who took on flesh, on fullness of God in helpless babe, this gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save, until on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. For every sin on him was laid. Here in the death of Christ I live. In the ground his body lay, the light of the world by darkness slain, and then bursting forth in glorious day. Oh, up from the grave he rose again, and as he stands in victory, sin's curse has lost its grip on me. For I am his and he is mine, oh, bought with the precious blood of Christ. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, oh, Jesus commands my destiny. And no power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Oh, turn your eyes upon Jesus and look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Sing that again. Turn your eyes. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Yeah, God, we just ask that you would turn our eyes toward you. God, that we would not be blinded by the distractions of this world. That we would recognize that our forever home, our final home, is with you.